But I want to thank all of the panelists and speakers who participated in the breakout sessions over the last couple of hours. Truly awesome. The only shame was that we couldn't sort of be in all of those places at the same time. Great job, and thank you to GW2 for live streaming that. So hopefully we'll have some videos of those in coming days. As we sort of look to close out this really successful Tech at State, I am super pleased to introduce to you our closing speaker, who's a close friend of mine, Andrew Rasiej. So Andrew is I love this. You ready for it? Wait for it. Professional doer, futurist, social entrepreneur, and founder of Personal Democracy Forum, which produces Personal Democracy Forum and other events about how the intersection of technology, politics, and civil society is empowering new levels of citizen engagement. And with that, I don't think that there's anybody better to help us sort of sum up some of the discussions and findings for today. Andrew.
So I know I'm sort of keeping everybody from I'm like between drinks, right? So that's the line. But actually, seeing all my friends here and people I've been working with for many years, I feel a little bit like Einstein's chauffeur. You know, Einstein had a chauffeur who was traveling around with him whenever he was giving out his theory of relativity speech. And, you know, they were doing 3-4 speeches a day. And after about 3 months of going from university to university to lecture hall to lecture hall, Einstein sat in the back of his limousine and complained to his chauffeur that he was sick and tired of giving the same speech over and over again. And the chauffeur said, well, Professor, I've been listening to your speech for the last 3 months. I can give that speech in my sleep. How about we switch at the next place? So they switched places. And at the next location, Einstein put on the chauffeur's hat, sat in the back of the room, and the chauffeur got on stage and delivered the theory of relativity speech in perfect order, not missing a single beat. And then as soon as it was over, a professor in the audience raises his hand and asks this unbelievably complicated question. And without missing a beat again, the chauffeur says, you know what, that question is so simple, my chauffeur can answer it. So, anyway, you can use that one anytime you want. There's no copyright on that. Anyway, so I want to tell you a story. I listened to some of your sessions, and a lot of the themes were things that we've talked about at PDF for a long time, those of you who know our conference. But you, of course, recognize this, this image of Tahrir Square. And the reason it's up is because I wanted to share with you a comment that was made by a blogger who's a member of our community by the name of Dave Parry. And if you remember, when this was happening, we were all paying attention to how social media was driving the protests, and people were using Facebook and following the protests. And Mubarak shut the internet off. And when he shut the internet off, what actually happened was that people who were following the protests online at home were actually forced into the streets because they couldn't find out what was going on any other way. So it actually kind of backfired on Mubarak because it put people out into the streets, not really so much to protest, but it swelled the numbers. And writing about that phenomenon, Dave Parry wrote the following line. He said, you can shut off the public internet, but you can't shut off the internet public. And it got a lot of us thinking that we have a term that defines a new type of human being on the planet. Someone who's a member of the internet public considers the internet to be central to their lives. And they think it's central to their lives either economically, politically, culturally, socially, even spiritually. And it has nothing to do with age. I mean, obviously it skews more younger and skews more towards places that are fully wired, but it's not related to any of the other ways we usually measure demographics or social movements. And you can see sort of the DNA of this emerging population in the ACTA protests, which you're familiar with. Here's a map of where they occurred throughout Europe. In the Sopa Pippa battle, this is a photograph actually from a protest at the New York Tech meetup, which the chairman of organized by sending one email and getting 3,000 people to show up in front of Senator Schumer and Gillibrand's offices. This is you can see it in the way in which the blogosphere and Russian dissidents and others are connecting with each other related to the political situation in Russia. The student protests in Israel. The Kony 2012, which you're all very familiar with, I'm sure. And even with, in China, where Cheng Guang Chen was a hot topic on the internet, and people weren't actually able to protest too publicly because they were afraid of the censors and what it might mean to them. So they started taking pictures of each other wearing sunglasses and posting them on the internet and on Facebook as a symbol of their solidarity with him and the whole country's understanding. And you can even see it in Gangnam Style, which has now been watched by the most watched video in the history of the world. I think almost 900 million views at this point. So what's really driving this? And we think it's the internet public. So, or at least that's what we've been sort of postulating at PDF. And I was listening to some of the sessions this afternoon, and a couple of the questions and some of the sort of comments from the sessions were, where is this all going? Are we going to be voting online? Are we going to be able to connect with our elected leaders? Are they actually going to finally listen to us because social media is changing the dynamics? I mean, all these questions, the questions that you yourselves know really, really well. So, this is a picture actually from the football Giants winning after the Super Bowl, their parade at City Hall in Manhattan. And I just want to point something out to you that in the next 5 or 6 years, 6 billion people are going to be connected to each other using devices that are going to make our iPhones and Android phones look like briefcase phones from 15 years ago. I mean, that's just around the corner. So what does that mean? I don't think any of us actually know. Some of us think, well, what happens to democracy? What happens to commerce? What happens to diplomacy? We get excited by moments like this, for sure. And we have a lot of hope around these kinds of moments. But we don't really know, is it government 2.0? Government's now going to get it, so therefore everything's going to work better? Or is it something else? Well, we know that government is making a lot more data available. I mean, Noel probably know better if that's the right number. I think that was the original number that was put out by Vivek Kundra a year into the Obama administration. But even though government's making more and more data available, those people carrying all those smartphones are actually collecting data themselves. And they're building tools and applications and platforms that are useful for people. In this case, Ushahidi Maps in Haiti. But even without even being conscious of it, this is Waze, which I use now whenever I drive down the Jersey Shore on weekends in the summer, although it's going to be a little different next summer, to keep track of traffic. I don't listen to shadow traffic anymore on the radio, that's for sure. Or Twitter Vote Report, keeping track of how elections are handled. Jimmy Carter on steroids. This was actually from 2008. This year we did far better than that with social media monitoring the elections. But we know that citizens with their phones and with their connectivity and their relationships, they're changing the dynamics. One of my favorite apps is this app called Exit Strategy. Any of you have taken the subway in New York, I highly recommend you get this app. It basically will tell you where to stand on a platform so that the stairway is right in front of you when you get off the train. But this wasn't built by the NTA. This was built by a brother-sister team in Brooklyn that have made over $500,000 downloading this app. 4 of those dollars were mine. I had to do it twice because I lost my iPhone the first time. And then, a little further down the road, you've heard of Fix My Street, taking pictures of potholes, or whether it's, any other kind of infrastructure problem. This project, though, this is another example. You've probably never heard of this project, but I want to share this one with you. So this young woman came to see us at a conference. Zinni is her name. She is HIV positive. She runs a hospice in South Africa that 40% of her nurses are HIV positive. She lost 8 family members to AIDS. And if you don't know this, 40% of the population of South Africa is HIV positive. And up until a few years ago, the government there didn't want to even publicize any kind of safety measures around informing the people to wear condoms or to be tested. Now, normal NGO methodology around this kind of problem would say we got to go raise a bunch of money, take a bunch of advertising space on television, on billboards and newspapers, and let's figure out how to inform the public. And there just wasn't that kind of money available. So she came to PopTech and got together with some technologists to sort of think about what could we do. And they discovered that in South Africa there were 35 million text messages sent every single day, of which 7 million were only 3 letters, PCM, which means please call me, because a large segment of the population in South Africa can't actually afford cell phone service, but they get free text messaging. And they text PCM to somebody who has minutes on their phone. They get a call back so they can actually speak. Well, that left 157 characters of white space whenever they send out a PCM message. So PopTech and Zini and a few other supporters went to see the telcos in South Africa and convinced them to let a public service announcement be embedded into the white space of those text messages in 5% of all the PCM calls. And since this project started, over 200,000 people have been tested for HIV, and the project has now expanded not only to warn people about HIV, but also how to protect themselves against malaria and tuberculosis in other parts of Africa. And so what I really wanted to share with you is that we think about civic engagement and we think about voting. I was crossing the street in New York a couple of weeks ago, and there was an apple in the middle of the street. And I bent down, I picked it up, and I got to the other side, I threw it in the garbage can. And my girlfriend looks at me and she says, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Well, some cab will come over and crush that apple, and somebody else running across the street to beat the light is not going to see it. It's going to slip and fall in front of a bus, and it's going to get killed." And she said, "You're crazy." And I said, "No, I'm taking civic responsibility." And we think so much about civics as this act of talking to elected leaders and talking to each other about who's going to win and what policies should we have, but we take very, very little responsibility for our space around us. And so what I really want to share with you is that we're as excited as we are about the technology, and as excited as we may be about the potential of building a better democracy, creating more transparency, having more accountability. What we're really doing is we're going from an era of e-government to we government. It's not going to be that government's going to figure it out and make it better. We're going to figure it out and make it better. We think that the internet is a great tool. It is. It can be used for bad things as well, as we know. But we also know that humanity connected has the potential of solving really big problems without waiting for government to solve them. And the people who come to this conference, the reason why you come here, the reason why I came, because Suzanne invited me and some of my friends at the State Department invited me, was because we are a tribe, and we are not just building a better democracy. We're building a better world. You are all members of the internet public, and there are millions more of you being birthed every day around the world. And they are not thinking about how to connect with their elected leader. They're thinking about how can they connect to each other globally, and whether they can change the dynamics of the way in which a connected society in the 21st century solves its problems, how to make the world more sustainable, how to distribute wealth, how to be happy. So you should be very proud because you're on the bleeding edge of this. But I can tell you now, after doing this myself for 15 years, that this is not a fad. This is not just a trend. You're at the front edge of a movement. And I'm thrilled to know you. I'm happy to see that the State Department gets this. And from here to forth, we will all work together to create not an e-government, but a we government. Thank you very much.
All right, you guys, Rasiej, awesome. Thank you so much. If you guys want to give him accolades, he's on @Rasiej. Also, before we came to the podium, he shared that New York Tech Meetup is now at 29,000, Andrew? Incredible, right? So we got to get cooking here in DC. We are far behind them. So, guys, I want to thank you all, participants, for being such active contributors to the discussion today, all of our panelists, all of the team at eDiplomacy, led by Tim and Isaiah, and everybody else for making today happen. Thank you to those of you who tune in online. And just a couple of announcements. So the next iteration of Tech at State is going to be coming up in March on internet freedom. And I think a lot of you do work on that, so we're excited to build a great program with you all around that. Also, one last final shout out. Thank you to our sponsors, obviously GW Law for hosting us here today, NDI, MetroStar Systems, and Topsy. So thanks. Have a great night. And wait, drinking. Right. So who wants to have a drink? Awesome. So we are going to meet over at Elephant and Castle, 19th and I. For those of you who don't know where that is, either hit me up on Twitter or hit up at Bonnie. So Bonnie Bogle of Development Seed totally pulled this